September 23, 1980, at the Stanley Theatre, Pittsburgh, a man jumped on stage and grabbed Bob Marley's microphone, but instead of security rushing in, Marley waved them away. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? The Stanley Theatre was packed beyond capacity that Tuesday night. 2,800 souls pressed against worn velvet seats, the air thick with anticipation and herb smoke. Bob Marley and the Wailers had just launched into their fourth song when it happened. A figure in a dark coat suddenly vaulted over the orchestra pit barrier, his heavy boots hitting the stage with a thud that echoed through the hall. Security guards lunged forward instantly, but then something extraordinary occurred. Bob Marley raised his left hand, palm out, and they froze. The music stumbled to a halt. Peter Tosh's guitar went silent. The drums stopped. Carlton Barrett's bass note hung in the air and died. The man on stage was maybe 45, white, built like someone who'd worked construction his whole life. His face was weathered, eyes red-rimmed. He gripped Marley's microphone stand with both hands, knuckles white, breathing hard. The entire theater held its breath. "You sing about peace," the man said, his voice cracking through the PA system. "You sing about love conquering everything." But what happened next would change everyone in that room forever. Marley took a step toward the man, dreadlocks swaying. His eyes, those eyes that had seen Kingston's darkest corners and Jamaica's brightest mornings, locked onto the stranger's face. "Yes, brother," Bob said softly, his voice somehow carrying without the microphone. "I sing these things." The man's jaw clenched. "My son is dead." Those four words hit the crowd like a physical force. Someone gasped. In the balcony, the security guards looked at each other, uncertain. Bob Marley's expression shifted. Something deep and knowing crossed his features. "Tell me," Marley said simply. The man's name was Michael Kowalski. He'd driven 3 hours from Youngstown, Ohio, with a loaded .38 in his glove compartment and a heart full of rage. His son Tommy had been 19, a good kid who'd gotten caught between two neighborhood crews fighting over territory. Tommy hadn't been involved with either side. He'd just been walking home from his job at the steel mill when the shooting started at 11:47 p.m. on September 2nd. 17 shots fired. Tommy was hit twice. He died reaching for his wallet, which contained a photo of his girlfriend Maria and a ticket to a Bob Marley concert he'd been planning to surprise her with. "He believed in your message," Kowalski said, his voice gaining strength. "Had your posters all over his room. Played your records every morning. One love," he'd say. "Dad, we need more love in this world." And where did that get him? Where did your peace get, my boy? The theater was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the stage lights. Wait until you hear what Bob Marley did next. Marley walked closer to Kowalski, close enough that the grieving father could have struck him, close enough that the security team shifted nervously. But Bob wasn't afraid. He'd been shot himself in 1976. 2 days before the Smile Jamaica concert, he knew what violence tasted like. "Your son," Marley said. "What was his name?" "Tommy. Thomas Michael Kowalski." Bob nodded slowly, then did something no one expected. He sat down, right there on the stage, cross-legged like a child, looking up at this broken father. The contrast was striking. The global superstar on the floor, the grieving working man standing above him. "Tell me about Tommy." For a moment, Kowalski looked confused. This wasn't what he'd planned. He'd rehearsed angry speeches during the drive. He'd imagined himself denouncing Marley's naive philosophy in front of thousands. But now, looking down at this man sitting peacefully on the stage floor, something cracked inside him. He was going to be an engineer, Kowalski began, his voice thick. Saved every penny for college, read every book he could find, Smart kid. Too smart for the neighborhood we lived in. But the detail that would shatter everyone's heart was still coming. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as Michael Kowalski slowly lowered himself to sit facing Bob Marley, two men on a stage floor, while the Wailers stood frozen behind them, while 2,800 people held their breath. "He wrote you a letter," Kowalski said suddenly, 3 weeks before he died. "Never got to mail it." Marley's eyes widened slightly. "You have this letter?" Kowalski reached into his coat, security tensed, and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "I was going to burn it after the funeral. I was going to burn everything that had to do with music, with peace, with hope. But you didn't." "No, I couldn't." Kowalski looked at the paper. "You want to know what my dead son wanted to tell you?" "Stop. This is where everything changes. This is where a concert became something else entirely." Marley nodded. Kowalski began to read, his voice trembling. "Dear Mr. Marley, my name is Tommy Kowalski from Youngstown, Ohio. I'm writing to tell you that your music saved my life. Not metaphorically, literally. Last month I was ready to give up. The mills are closing, friends are dying or leaving, and sometimes it feels like love is losing. But then I heard you sing that line about emancipating yourself from mental slavery, and I understood. The chains aren't just outside, they're inside too." Kowalski's voice broke. He stopped reading, unable to continue. Marley stood up slowly, walked to his microphone stand, and adjusted it down. Then he spoke to the crowd for the first time since the interruption. "This father," he said, gesturing to Kowalski, "his pain is real, his anger is real, his son Tommy is real." Marley's voice grew stronger. "And those who say music can change the world, we must also admit, music cannot stop bullets." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't what they expected to hear. "But listen to me now," Marley continued. Tommy Kowalski understood something. He understood that peace is not the absence of violence. Peace is the presence of justice. Love is not weakness. Love is the courage to stand up after you've been knocked down. He turned back to Kowalski. "Your son's death is not a failure of peace. Your son's death is why we must fight harder for it." What Kowalski did next stunned everyone, including Bob Marley himself. The grieving father stood up, letter still in his hand, and walked to the microphone. "I came here tonight to hurt you," he said to Marley, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I wanted to make you feel what I feel, empty, angry, betrayed by every promise of a better world." The security team moved closer, but again Marley waved them back. "But my son," Kowalski continued, "Tommy wouldn't want that. He'd probably be horrified that his old man jumped on Bob Marley's stage." A bitter laugh escaped him. He'd say, "Dad, you're embarrassing me in front of my hero." Someone in the audience let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. Kowalski turned to face the crowd. "I don't know if music can change the world. I don't know if love conquers hate. But I know my son believed it could. And maybe that belief is worth something, even if it couldn't save him." The silence that followed was profound. Then from somewhere in the balcony, someone started clapping, slowly, steadily. Others joined. Not the explosive applause of a concert, but something deeper, a recognition of human pain and human courage. But Bob Marley wasn't done. What he said next would be remembered by everyone in that theater for the rest of their lives. "Mr. Kowalski," Marley said, "would you honor us? Would you honor us? Would you honor us? Tommy, stay on this stage with us for one song." Kowalski looked bewildered. I don't sing." "You don't need to sing. Just stand with us. Let your son's spirit stand with us." Carlton Barrett, the drummer, started a slow rhythm. Aston Barrett's bass joined in, Peter Tosh moved to Kowalski's side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The Wailers began to play, not one of their hits, but something slower, deeper, more mournful. Marley began to speak, rather than sing, his words riding the rhythm. For every youth taken too soon, for every father's tears, for every mother's cry in the night, we remember, we stand, we continue. The audience swayed, many crying openly. Michael Kowalski stood rigid at first. Then slowly, his shoulders began to shake. The tears he'd been holding back since the funeral finally came. Bob Marley moved closer, still speaking his rhythmic poetry about loss and hope, about Tommy Kowalski from Youngstown, who believed in love. Then something extraordinary happened. Kowalski pulled out the letter again and held it up. The rest, he said to Marley. He wrote more. The music continued softly as Kowalski read, Mr. Marley, I'm starting a youth center in my neighborhood, just a small room in the church basement. But it's a start. We're going to teach kids music, help with homework, keep them safe after school. I'm calling it the One Love Center. Maybe it's naive, maybe it won't work, but you taught me that the biggest revolution is the one that happens in our own hearts first. Now even the Wailers were struggling to keep playing through their emotions. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. Marley took the microphone again. Pittsburgh, he called out. This man came here with pain. His son had a dream, a youth center, a place of peace. What do we do with dreams of the departed? The crowd roared back, understanding forming like electricity through the theater. We make them live, someone shouted. We build them, cried another. Marley turned to Kowalski. Your son's center, it will exist. Tonight everyone here, we commit. The One Love Center in Youngstown, Ohio, in memory of Thomas Michael Kowalski. The theater erupted, not in applause, but in affirmation. People were standing, shouting pledges, pulling out wallets. Someone in the front row, a woman in a business suit, stood up and announced she was a contractor. She'd donate the renovation work. A group of college students from Carnegie Mellon said they'd volunteer as tutors. The spontaneous fundraising lasted 17 minutes. By the time order was restored, over $23,000 had been pledged, and 47 people had signed up to volunteer. Kowalski was overwhelmed, covering his face with his hands. I didn't come for this. No, Marley said, putting his arm around the man's shoulders. You came for war, but your son's spirit came for peace. And peace won tonight, brother. Peace won. The security captain later reported something strange in his incident report. He wrote that Michael Kowalski had been searched after the event, standard procedure after someone rushes a stage. They found something in his coat pocket that he'd forgotten about. A ticket stub, not for that night's show, but for a Bob Marley concert in Cleveland from 1978. Written on the back in youthful handwriting were the words, Dad, thanks for taking me, best night ever, love, Tommy. Kowalski hadn't remembered the ticket was in that coat. It was Tommy's coat, grabbed from his son's closet that morning, when his own jacket seemed too thin for the September evening. The moment that would define the entire night was approaching. As the crowd continued their spontaneous fundraising for Tommy's youth center, Marley whispered something to his band. They nodded, taking their positions. The opening notes of a song began. Not a famous hit, but something deeper, more personal. Mr. Kowalski, Marley said, this song, we've only played it a few times. It's about fathers and sons, about the weight we carry, about the love that survives even death. Your son, Tommy, he lives in you. He lives in everyone here tonight who heard his story. As the music built, something unexpected happened. Kowalski, the grieving father who'd come with violence in his heart, began to move, not dancing exactly, but swaying, letting the rhythm hold him up when his legs wanted to give way. What nobody knew was that Tommy had tried to teach his father to dance just 3 weeks before his death. "Dad, you don't dance with your feet," Tommy had said. "You dance with your heart. The feet just follow." Now on this stage, with his son gone, he finally understood. The entire theater began to move with him. 2,800 strangers became one organism of grief and hope, swaying in the ornate old theater, creating a moment that transcended performance and became something else: a healing, a church service, a revolution of the heart. Peter Tosh would later say in an interview that never aired, "I've played thousands of shows, but that night in Pittsburgh, that wasn't a concert. That was medicine. That was what music is supposed to be." Stop. Here's something nobody knows about that night, something that changes everything. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the Stanley Theatre, addressed to the management, urgent. Inside was a photograph and a note. The photograph showed a small storefront in Youngstown, with a hand-painted sign, "One Love Youth Center, in memory of Tommy Kowalski." The note was in Bob Marley's handwriting. "The revolution is not just words. Attached is a check for $50,000, my entire earnings from the Pittsburgh show, and the next 3 concerts. Make sure this reaches Mr. Kowalski. Make sure Tommy's dream lives. One love, Bob Marley." But Michael Kowalski never received just a check. He received something more valuable every month for the next year, until Bob Marley's own death. In May 1981, packages would arrive at the youth center. Sometimes instruments donated by the Wailers, sometimes boxes of records. Once a beautiful letter from Rita Marley about the power of a mother's love and a father's courage. The youth center opened on November 15, 1980. Kowalski stood in front of 40 neighborhood kids, holding a pair of drumsticks that Carlton Barrett had given him that night in Pittsburgh. "My son Tommy believed in something," he told them. "He believed that music could change the world. I thought he was wrong, but then I met a man who showed me that Tommy wasn't trying to change the world. He was trying to change hearts, starting with his own, starting with mine." The center is still there today, though few people know its origin story. They don't know about the night a grieving father rushed Bob Marley's stage. They don't know about the letter never sent, or the coat that carried a memory, or the way 2,800 people became one family for 90 minutes in Pittsburgh. But here's what really matters about that night. 6 months after the concert, Michael Kowalski received a letter from Jamaica. Bob Marley was sick. The cancer that would soon take his life was advancing rapidly through his body, having spread from his toe to his liver, his lungs, his brain. He was down to 82 pounds, a shadow of the vibrant performer who'd commanded that Pittsburgh stage. But he wanted Kowalski to know something. "Brother Michael, I think of Tommy often, in my prayers, in my quiet moments. When the pain gets bad, when the doctors shake their heads, I remember your courage that night. You asked where peace got your boy. I'll tell you now, peace got him home. Not to the grave, but to the eternal home where no bullet can reach. And peace got you to that stage where your pain became purpose." Tommy's death was not the failure of love. Tommy's life was the triumph of it. Every child who walks through that center's doors is Tommy saying one love again. Your son is not gone. He multiplied. I'm dying now, brother. The cancer, it's winning, but I'm not afraid. You know why? Because I've seen what happens after. That night in Pittsburgh, your son was there. I felt him, standing right behind you, his hand on your shoulder whispering, tell him, Dad, tell him everything. Death is not the end. It's the echo that keeps bouncing off the living, creating ripples, creating change. When I'm gone, I'll find Tommy. We'll talk about you, about the center, about the night hatred turned to hope. Hold the faith, brother. Respect, Bob. Kowalski read that letter every day for a year. He read it at the groundbreaking for the center. He read it when the first child walked through the doors, A 7-year-old named Marcus, who wanted to learn guitar. He read it the day Bob Marley died, May 11, 1981, at 11:30 a.m., almost the exact time Tommy had been shot 8 months earlier. What happened at Bob Marley's funeral was never reported, but Kowalski was there. He'd flown to Jamaica with the last of his savings. At the funeral, attended by thousands, he stood in the back, just another face in the crowd. But Rita Marley saw him. She'd been told about Pittsburgh by Bob in his final days. She walked through the entire crowd to reach him, took his hands, and said, "Bob told me about your son. He said Tommy was a prophet too, in his way. Prophets don't always live long, but their messages live forever." She then did something unprecedented. She invited Kowalski to the private family ceremony, where only Bob's closest family and friends would say goodbye. There, in a small room with just 30 people, Michael Kowalski, a Catholic steelworker from Ohio, said a prayer in his broken voice. "Tommy, if you're with Bob now, tell him thank you. Tell him the center has 17 kids enrolled already. Tell him we painted One Love on the door in red, gold, and green. Tell him he was wrong about one thing. Music can stop bullets. It just stops them in the next generation, in the kids who choose guitars over guns." Carlton Barrett, the drummer, pulled Kowalski aside after the ceremony. "That night in Pittsburgh," he said, "Bob was different after. He talked about your boy Tommy during rehearsals, during sound checks. He'd say, 'We playing for Tommy tonight. We playing for all the Tommies.' Your son changed how Bob saw his mission. Not just spreading peace, but catching the ones who fall through the cracks of peace." But here's what nobody knew until now. Kowalski framed that letter. It hangs in the One Love Center to this day, next to a photo from that night at the Stanley Theatre. A grieving father and a dying prophet, sitting on a stage floor like two boys sharing secrets, while the world watched and wept and hoped. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran a small item about the show, mentioning only a minor disruption handled peacefully. They had no idea what they'd missed. The bootleg recordings that circulated for years captured the music, but not the miracle. You had to be there to understand how sorrow became strength, how rage became redemption. Michael Kowalski is 84 now, but his memory of that night remains crystal clear. He lives in a small apartment above the One Love Center, refusing to retire fully. Every morning at 6 a.m., he unlocks the doors, turns on the lights, and plays Bob Marley's Redemption song on the old sound system, the same one Peter Tosh personally donated in 1981. The center has graduated over 3,000 kids. Among them, Maria Rodriguez, now a trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins, who keeps a photo of Tommy Kowalski in her office. "Mania. He never knew me, but his father saved my life." Jerome Washington, a Grammy-nominated producer, who started as a 7-year-old learning drums at the center, and David Chang, whose mother enrolled him the day after his brother was shot, and who now runs a network of youth centers across Ohio. Every September 23rd, Kowalski plays a worn cassette tape, the only recording he has of that night, not of the concert, but of the car ride home, where he'd talked to Tommy's memory for 2 hours straight, telling his dead son everything that had happened, crying and laughing, and planning the youth center that would carry his name. The tape captures something else too. 3 times during that drive, the radio mysteriously turned on by itself, each time playing a Bob Marley song. Kowalski's car, a 1974 Buick, had a broken radio that hadn't worked in 2 years. "You were right, Tommy," he says on that tape, his voice rough with tears and wonder. "Love is stronger. It just sometimes needs a while to prove it." The tape ends with Michael Kowalski singing, badly, brokenly, but singing nonetheless. The song Bob Marley had performed with him standing there, about fathers and sons, about carrying on, when carrying on seems impossible. In the background, if you listen carefully with headphones, Audio experts swear you can hear a second voice, younger, harmonizing, but that's impossible. Kowalski was alone in that car, wasn't he? The last living witness to speak publicly about that night was Margaret Chen, the Stanley Theatre's head usher. Interviewed in 2023, "I worked that theater for 52 years, saw everyone from Duke Ellington to the Rolling Stones. But that night, with Bob Marley and that father, that was different. After Mr. Kowalski left the stage, after the music started again, I saw something. This young man, maybe 19-20, standing in the back. He was wearing a hard hat and work clothes, just standing there, smiling. He looked exactly like the father, just younger. I blinked, and he was gone. I never told anyone because who'd believe me? But I know what I saw. That boy came to see his father find peace. Some things, they're bigger than what we understand." The real power of that night wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the transformation, and how it rippled across decades and lives, proving that sometimes the greatest concerts aren't remembered for the music played, but for the silence between the songs, where humanity happens. 3 people from that Pittsburgh audience went on to open their own youth centers in other cities, inspired by what they'd witnessed. A teenager in the balcony became a social worker. A couple on the verge of divorce held each other and remembered why they'd fallen in love. A young man planning to rob a liquor store after the show threw away his gun in a trash can outside the theater. Bob Marley never spoke publicly about that night. When interviewers asked about memorable concerts, he'd mention Madison Square Garden or the Smile Jamaica concert. But those close to him knew Pittsburgh was different. Rita Marley said he kept Tommy's letter in his guitar case for the rest of the tour. "It reminded him," she said, "that every song we sing lands in someone's life. Sometimes it saves them. Sometimes it can't, but it always matters." The Stanley Theatre has a small plaque now, installed in 2010 by a group of fans who tracked down the story. It reads, "On this stage, September 23, 1980, Bob Marley and Michael Kowalski proved that love is not naive, it is necessary." But here's the part that will give you chills. In 2019, a filmmaker researching Bob Marley's final tour found something in the Marley estate archives. It was a cassette tape labeled Pittsburgh Mirius After, recorded by Junior Marvin on the tour bus. For 37 minutes, Bob Marley talked about what had happened. The father, him come with death in his pocket. Marley's voice crackles on the tape, but then him speak his boy's name, Tommy, and everything change. This is why we do this, not for the cheers, for the Tommies, for the fathers who think love failed them. At minute 23, Marley says, "The boy was there, Tommy, standing behind his father. When the father read the letter, the boy put his hand on his father's shoulder." The tape was never released, but its existence proves that for Bob Marley, the Pittsburgh encounter was what he would call the night I understood my purpose. The last entry in the stage manager's log from that night reads, "Show resumed after 22-minute interruption. Audience unusually emotional but peaceful. Mr. Marley requested house lights up for final 3 songs, so he could see everyone's faces. Never seen anything like it." Michael Kowalski still runs the One Love Center, though others do most of the day-to-day work now. On the wall of his office, next to Bob's letter and Tommy's photograph, hangs a sign that he had made after that night. Peace is not the absence of tragedy. Peace is what we build from the pieces tragedy leaves behind. Every September, the center holds a concert. Local kids playing instruments, singing songs about hope. Michael Kowalski always speaks, telling the story of a father's rage transformed into a community's resolve. He ends the same way every year. "My son Tommy believed music could change the world. Bob Marley showed me it could change something more important. It could change a broken heart into a healing one." The final truth about that night in Pittsburgh is this: we tell stories about famous people, because we think they're different from us. But that night, Bob Marley became fully human, vulnerable, uncertain, sitting on a floor with a stranger's grief. And Michael Kowalski became more than his pain. He became what his son had always believed he could be. Love didn't win because it conquered hate. Love won because it absorbed the hate, the pain, the loss, and transformed it into something useful, a youth center, a second chance, a story that reminds us that our heroes are human and our humans can be heroic. Somewhere, in whatever dimension the departed inhabit, Tommy Kowalski knows his letter finally got delivered, not to Bob Marley's mailbox, but to his heart, to his stage, to history itself. And that's how a 19-year-old steelworker's son from Youngstown, Ohio, changed the world, not with his life, but with the love he left behind. One love, one heart, even when broken, especially when broken, still beating its message across the years.